Hello, adventurers. My name is Maximus, and I'm here with our good friend Moves like Jagger from the GG and crew. We are here for the
Hello.
second. Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was in the zone. We're here for the second iteration of Castles and Cantrips Tome of Knowledge, where we talk about D&D things and we answer your burning D&D questions. We have some fun topics tonight that I think will be probably very passionate about at different points.
I think
Uh,
so.
if I sound a little off, I'm a little under the weather, but that's okay. I feel
Sound
rejuvenated.
normal and wonderful as usual.
It's all post production. Thank you for that. They're
And if
fixing it
anyone
in
has
post.
connections with Burt's Bees chapstick or lip balm, Max uses it all the time, and we will be happy to sing your praises.
Sad. They never got back to me.
No? Dang. Never mind. Screw Burt's Bees. Unless they're interested, then
Unless.
unless
Oh man, hope everyone's doing well. Sorry there was not a lot of content last week, but I was on vacation and I decided that I didn't want to spend a lot of brain cycles make sure that stuff happened. So here we are. We're in between campaigns. We're talking about D&D. We're gearing up for some fun things like this Friday will be our first um
one
CNC
shot.
one shot. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. I was looking for the words in my brain. Our first CNC
Gotcha.
one shot in between the campaigns, which is going to be featuring um, me as a player. Most importantly, no, I'm not kidding. Not most importantly. It will be featuring Moves as well as a player. But we also have good friend Jesse Heinig as the Dungeon Master Extraordinaire. And some other friends. Kumo Gorogoro will be joining the stream, as well as Nina Nikolic, as well as you may know her as Kid Kerrigan from her streaming days, will be joining. So we'll have a very fun adventure for this Friday that I'm very excited for. It's gonna be wild.
I keep going back and forth with my character voice. I should just do this. I'm like, can I do that for 3 hours? And then I've been playing some other games. I was like, oh, I could kind of do this. And I don't know. I keep going back and forth. Probably like with Ron, it'll be decided as soon as my mouth opens the day of.
Is that how you decided that? Just
Yeah.
it just happened. Wow, that's interesting. I only remember that for our Out of Combat Live coming
Wow.
up. But most importantly, this Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific, the Maw of Many Worlds is the name of this one shot. So it'll be a good time uh, for all. So, with that being said, you want to dive into some D&D topics?
Yeah. We have a whole list of things, but typically we just talk about 2 topics per what's it called? Tome of Knowledge segments as we're doing these things on Mondays now. And one of them is things about 5th edition that frustrate us. I could talk about
That's
this for days,
so
but
good.
well, why don't you start, Max? Let's start with a little sum from your end.
Okay. I was thinking about this, and I have a couple of things that frustrate me, but I think I'm going to start at the macro view here. And
Mhm.
typically, I think in the player's handbook, it describes the 3 pillars of Dungeons and Dragons in play, of which are social interactions, combat, and exploration. Those main three. I feel like exploration, in my opinion, has the least fleshed out rules out of any of the pillars, and it frustrates me because if you think about someone like the ranger, right?
Mhm.
They actively have spells that negate that pillar. They don't make it easier. They negate that pillar of adventure. So, like for example, when you think exploration, trailblazing, surviving in the wilderness, I have a spell called Goodberry that you can just eat without having to do anything. Okay.
Yeah.
Or like backgrounds, like what Mac's character had in the first campaign, was Wanderer. in that
Mhm.
respect. If I'm remembering correctly, the
Outlander, I
name
believe, right? Or is
is
that
it
a variant?
Outlander? I think
I
you're
think it's
right.
Outlander.
I'm gonna check just so my brain can be at ease while I'm
Zeus
while I'm
Zeus
discussing this.
confirmed.
Yeah, Outlander. Thank you. Because Wanderer is a different one. Thank you. Maybe it's not one at all. Um, but yeah, that is. And with that, I'm gonna read the text so I don't misrepresent when it says. I might be doing a lot of this just to make sure. So Outlander, the feature is called Wanderer. So I knew I got it somewhere. I didn't make it up.
Yes, yes.
So the important part about this is in the second half, in addition, you can find food and fresh water for yourself and up to 5 other people each day, provided that the land offers berries, small game, water, and so forth. You don't have to roll, you don't have to do anything. You just find it, which once again sort of negates the whole exploration pillar of D&D. And I will say that the Ranger has some exploration utility built into it, but there's not a lot there. Not really. And that's one thing that I wish would get, I don't know, get bolstered a little bit in the newest edition. But
I
that frustrates
wonder
me.
yeah, I wonder if they had, like, some research studies or then had, like, some focus groups. Or, like, what do you least care about? And when they came up with these pillars and people were like, "Yeah, exploration's boring. It takes
Mhm.
time away from the game or the story or combat or for the other reasons people
Yeah.
play, tabletop RPGs." Um, yeah, it just like it happens, right? Like before you had to roll survival, but now you don't have to as long as you have Outlander background.
And that's interesting that you say that. Is you summed up the whole pillar of you just roll a survival check. That's it. That's it. That's all you got to do. You just got to pass some survival checks, and you're fine for this entire pillar of like D&D. I don't know. And maybe you're right. Maybe people just don't like that style of play. But I would argue that in D&D, you typically play the game you want to play, but it's
Yeah.
hard to play a game you want to play if there are no tools in your toolbox for it.
Hmm.
For me, so yeah, I don't know. I don't have any suggestions. I'm not a game designer by any means. Because I try to stick pretty close to rules because I don't like to adjust things without because I fear the implications that I can't see ahead. But no, I just wish there was more things about that, especially for people who like that sort of thing. But
I
I don't
guess
know.
from personal experience, because I have another group that we play online, and it's Lord of the Rings, but we're using fifth edition as a foundation. And like Tolkien, like the books, it's all about describing and the journey and
Mhm.
exploration. So that was like the focus of this campaign, and I don't like it. It's like uh I thought it would be cool at first, but then it's just like it kind of just drags out and it doesn't really lead to anything. Uh it's just yeah, so maybe there's a good reason that they're like, all right, let's put exploration on the back burner and yeah, like you can solve it with a background or a survival check. Um I don't know, I'm curious
Mhm.
what chat has to say if they would be interested in like exploration. I don't want
Yeah, and
to read this.
I think what comes of it too is when you think of like what players want to do, like you need to reward them. If you want them to explore, you need to reward them for exploring as well, right?
Mhm.
There's inherent rewards to combat. You know, if you're doing XP, you get XP or loot or what have you. Um, there can easily be made rewards for social encounters, social interactions, for getting access to places that you didn't previously have access to. But I think there's a lot on the DM of if you want your people to explore, you've got to make it worthwhile for them to do so.
I agree. Oh, let's see.
I will
Uh,
say what Trekhead said. Every team eventually becomes a game designer in the quest to find ways to make the game suit the needs of their players. I agree to that in some cases, but to me, the maybe I put the word game designer too high on like a pedestal because it's for me it's like just because I cook a lot doesn't make me a chef. Just because I DM a lot doesn't make me a game designer. That's kind of how I feel in my head.
That's how it starts, you know? There's, like, a whole thing on how to incorporate Dungeons& and Dragons into your resume, and that's, like, 100% something you can do.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I got my job at Obsidian, talking about Dungeons& and Dragons and Final Fantasy Tactics in my interview. I'm pretty sure that's how I got the job, so
Hey, get me in a room with somebody. I'll talk D&D all day. Anyway, you're gonna mention something about chat or something else before I interrupted you.
I was gonna move along and mention, something I find that frustrates me to no end, from 5th edition is, the feats. I find that the feats in 5th edition are lackluster, and there's
Mhm.
only, like, a core, like, handful of feats that are actually useful or beneficial, and the rest is maybe flavor, but why would you forsake flavor for, like, 2 stat points, you know what I mean?
Let's see.
And I came from 3rd edition, where you had your milestones, like, 3rd level, you get your feat, 4th level, you get your stat points, and, it just happens every 3rd and 4th level. Um, and I felt like because of that, there's not really a way to, like, customize your character, particularly in combat because my friends were, like, combat heavy group, so it's just, like, I feel frustrated where I can't make the character I want to create in 5th edition. And then let alone, like, if in 3rd edition, if you had 2 fighters, they can be completely different fighters based solely on feats. And then in 5th edition, you can't really do that.
Yeah, I feel like especially for like martial characters, there are really some go-to feats that if you care about min-maxing or keeping up with damage, there are some go-to feats that if you just don't take, then you're behind.
Yeah.
I see what you mean there. I think there might be other ways to fix that too, but I I love the idea of feats, and I will say that feats are optional as well. They're an optional rule in the player's handbook, if I remember correctly. Um, but I think one D&D is going to go the right direction of that the feats are now leveled, where you can't take certain feats until certain levels. That might be the pendulum going the opposite way of you can't immediately take the super powerful ones.
Yeah.
Um, so you have to take something else. But yeah, I think it just depends on the style of gameplay that you want to play to.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't look too much into 1D after, like, the whole fiasco of the OGL.
Yeah.
I kind of just, like, gave up on it. I was like, I'm not even gonna bother anymore. But I mean, it makes sense to, like, I wouldn't say, well, maybe because I grew up with 3rd edition and I first started playing D&D with 3rd edition, maybe,
Hmm.
like, that's, like, the golden era of D&D to me. I don't know how it is for other players. Um, but, like, yeah, incorporating things from the previous editions that people enjoyed and putting it into the next, what is it? Whatever they're gonna call it, version or addition to
Hmm.
Dungeons& and Dragons. Um,
And I see what you mean. It's always a hard decision because you're like, do I take this feat or do I just take two ability score improvements? Right. Because I was playing in a different game where I play a ranger and I was
mhm.
looking at all these cool things. I'm like, actually, if I just take two more points into dex, it's better than, than any of
Yeah.
these feats are going to give me more often than not in this case.
Yeah, exactly. Like, to me, I think stat trumps feats because you get +1. If you're upgrading your modifier, that's a game changer for your character.
Yeah.
Especially with, like, how low key magic is in 5th edition, where there's not openly available where players can accumulate a ridiculous amount of gold and just, like, deck their character out like in 3rd edition where you're just, like, magicked out to the max with
Yeah.
insane amount of bonuses and stats and like that. But I feel that, yeah, that's another thing that frustrates me is about the magic system in 5th edition where it's really you can't it's not openly available right? You can't just buy stuff because there's no monetary value
Mhm.
in the book, and it's really up to the DM to figure out how to reward the players with magic items.
Yeah. Something that Zeus has said in the chat is that feats are more of a way to diversify rather than double down on what you already do. And I keep thinking about that, and I'll say this forever. I love the way invocations work for Warlock. I wish that all classes had something like that. Or for minimum, like fighter, battle master. I'm one of the people in the camp that thinks that the battle masters should be base fighter stuff. And I know that there's always the balancing act that they're trying to put with fifth edition of not being too crunchy,
Mhm.
to have this sort of wide appeal, low barrier to entry. But I mean, there's so many things, and this is kind of going off tangent a little bit too, of like weapons. Like weapons are just they're there's just like a dice, like a damage stick is all they are. Very
Mm.
like most of the time, in most cases, the type of damage that your weapon does doesn't matter, except for very few cases with certain monsters. I would love some more versatility in weapons too, and I know that they had that earlier in the earlier editions. I know that they cut it for it was too crunchy, but I don't know. There should be more ways to differentiate your character, and it hurts that right now the main way for everyone to do that is with a feat, but you're also sacrificing your ability score improvement. But
Yeah, that's why I think they should bring back what they did in 3rd edition is, you have your capstone level 4, 8, 12, moving forward, you get your stat points, but then, like make it every 5 levels instead of every 3. If they want to like balance that out with you get to pick a feat, but that's something they'll have to change moving forward if they do adopt that idea because, as it is now, there's not that many great amount of feats to choose from.
that's the thing that Wizards typically does is they don't want to contradict the player's handbook. They'll never retroactively change things in the player handbook. They'll change things and they'll jump through hoops later on in different books to make things work. So I don't know, maybe I'm holding out for the one D&D Marshall stuff to come out to see what they're going to do specifically with that. There's always a big to do online of the Marshall cat and the Marshall and caster disparity. Um, and I think it's exaggerated in some cases, but I think that I'm just curious to see what they do about it. You said something interesting that was on one of my points though, when you talked about how magic in D&D you just can't go buy magic items, and you
Yeah.
sort of tangentially hit this of you can't get a whole bunch of gold and spend it on magic items. I wish that there was more guidance on how players can spend their gold in
Mm.
D&D, right? I agree with the setting in that I don't like it where you can just go buy magic items and everyone can just gobble up magic items and deck themselves out. I don't personally like it. That's not like the type of game that I play. But I mean, I have Vin's character already pulled up because I was looking stuff up. I mean, you've got thousands and thousands of gold.
It's
Your
just sitting
characters
in.
do,
Yeah.
just sitting there, right? I mean, yeah, you can buy some magic items, but you have to go through a broker and do all that stuff, which I like that type of game. But and there's the
Yeah, I
thing
think
is, it's
you did a
hard.
good job with that.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought that it made sense in the world, and I used some of what Xanathar's rules did, which I think are had some much needed expansion on that. But I, it's hard for me to point you guys in different ways that I think you could spend money without there being existing rules around that, right? Where like, hey, you guys could invest in, a tavern and have some sort of passive income. Cool, that sounds great. How does that work, Max? Well, I don't know. I'll have to think it. I'll have to think of it. Right. Or like, hey, we could make our own stronghold and have our own base of operations. Cool, Max. Um, how does that work? What does that give us? Well, I don't know. I'll have to think of something up, make it up if you want to do it. Because the reality is I'm not gonna make something up for something in the hopes that you're gonna do it, because then I'd never stop and there'd be a whole bunch of shit out there that you guys never use, right? I typically do like, hey, we want to do this. I'm like, cool, I'll figure it out. um and there's stuff out there. I know like Matt Colville's company MCDM, they had strongholds and followers, and I bought that. But man, that's crunchy. I need something in the middle for me
Yeah.
personally. that's the other side of the pendulum there. There's a lot to that book, which I mean they're selling it, so there better be a lot in it. But
Mhm. No, yeah, I think those are good solutions that you brought up, but yeah, there's zero guidance. Like, yeah, we can invest in this village and make it a prosperous village.
yeah,
And yeah, but what does that mean? How does that affect the world? How does that help the players and also helps the village in like a global standpoint in the world? It's just like very Wild West approach about it because there's no copy, but other than maybe if you like you go on subreddits or forums and talk to other players who've done these kind of things to like just
mhm.
make up, homebrew stuff.
And there in I will say that there isn't. I don't remember if it's in the PHB or the DMG. It's like a palace costs this much. Like great, it's a thing and a gold value, but what does that do? What does a tower mean? um, I thought that's really funny. What Trek had said. Legacy naming conventions. It's a great one. Chill touch is not touch. It has nothing to do with gold. Cure
Hmm,
wounds isn't healing wounds because hit points don't represent direct physical damage. That yeah, exactly. Good berry doesn't transmute berries, but it's a transmutation spell, and they just appear in your hand. And then detect evil and good has nothing to do with evil or good. Yes,
that's
there's
true.
there's a lot of legacy
Yeah.
stuff in there that just doesn't make sense. Like case in point, rogues having longsword proficiency. What in fifth edition? What's a rogue gonna do with the longsword? Right?
Tough. Throw it.
Not use sneak attack ever.
Yeah. I think there's like maybe like a lot of oversights stuff that
Mhm.
just they didn't they're like sure why not if rogues want to use long swords go for it but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Just more often than not is flavor your rapier and you're better off in that case.
Yeah, yeah, basically. Yeah, chat if you guys want to join the conversation or have any questions, then Max and I are happy to answer. Another thing that frustrates me is uh concentration spells. They're like I'm just making up a number, but I feel like 80% of spells in the book are concentration and you can't do it all. Like it sucks. It just feels I understand that like okay, well for third edition, if you're a spellcaster, you're basically a god. Like there's no
Mhm.
matter what. If you're a high level spellcaster, you win. That's just straight up. So they had to taper it down. Like in fourth edition, they homogenized all the classes. Like, all right, we're gonna give all the classes encounter powers, daily powers, and all this stuff. And then everyone felt the same. No one felt unique. And then in fifth edition, they're like, all right, maybe we can recalibrate what we did between third and fourth and try and then just limit spellcasters to only one concentration. But then like you can't buff the party, so you don't feel like you're useful. Because like if you're trying to be a buffer, you can only really buff one person, and then the rest of the party gets asked out. And I don't know, it's just like I feel so limited in what you could do, especially when like Ranger, for example, like Hunter's Mark is a concentration spell. Like why are you making it a class feature or that should be just a class feature?
Okay. So I was gonna say I'm going to counter you on everything on concentration except that.
Okay.
Except Hunter's Mark. Because fuck that. That should be a class feature and not have concentration. But I I like concentration in that the spellcaster has to make choices of what they want to do per combat. And like what you mentioned, if even in the confines of like fifth edition, if I was to give an enemy or a player for that matter, instead of concentrating on one spell, you can concentrate on two spells now. That would totally change the game and increase their power level by a
Mhm,
lot. Like imagine that. I like what it does, but I get how it can be frustrating, especially certain classes like paladin, warlock. Most of your shit's concentration, right? Um, but yeah, I can see where you're coming from because it gets difficult, right? Only one at a time. If you're concentrating on a spell, you can't hold another spell, right? You can't use a ready action because you'll lose your concentration on a
mhm.
different spell. But Yeah, I see where you're coming from, but I like concentration to kind of rein some of that in.
I think for me, I think a solution would be right. You can't have like 5 active spells going on at the same time. That's just ridiculous. But like you can have one. But yeah, again, you said like if you have 2 concentration spells, and that makes it this the ramping go up crazy. So for me, I think maybe if you could have one beneficial concentration spell and one offensive concentration spell, um,
That'd be
it would
interesting.
it would still limit it and not. I mean, it's still a power creep, but like
Yeah.
I'm interested in testing that out and see how
Hmm.
it feels in like in a small like maybe like a 4 session campaign just to see how it feels.
Hmm. Yeah, that'd be interesting. One beneficial and one offensive. You'd have to think. You'd have to rethink of what concentration is. Do you lose concentration on them both? Do you roll for them individually? Be interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It
I
would
would
increase the
say
power
both.
level, but
Yeah, I would say
yeah.
you lose both, like because you're having 2 concentration spells at once.
Hmm.
So maybe the concentration DC is higher because if you have 2 active concentration spells, then the DC ramps up. But if you're just focusing on one, then it's just normal.
Wondering, I'm trying to think of like, what if that was a feat? And then I was like, well, no, then everyone would take that feat that says spellcaster because it'd be a
Yeah.
must-have feat at that point.
Yes.
I'm thinking like, what if it was a class feature? That'd be a cool class feature, maybe. That'd be a very powerful class feature. This is why I'm not a game designer.
But that's okay because, you know, a lot of D&D is making up your own shit and
Yeah,
playing the style you want. So, maybe it's okay if you're okay with having that kind of high power campaign or game setting, then why not test it out?
yeah. I've got a couple more things that frustrate me.
Yeah, go for it.
Um, one, monster design in fifth
Mhm.
edition. I feel like there are a lot of monsters and enemies that are just I'm a sack of hit points and I can attack, and that's all I can do. It's very frustrating. Um, Case in point that I'll point to constantly, um, owlbear.
Mhm.
All that is a sack of hit points that has multi attack. Right? It's got different stats and stuff like that, but it doesn't feel
Unique.
special. Doesn't feel good. Um, which is why I stole fourth edition owlbear stuff from the owlbear that you all faced in the campaign, because it's like an owlbear is I'm not, prestigious isn't the right word. It's a very famous, well known monster.
It's
It should have
iconic.
some. Yeah, it's iconic. There you go.
It's
Thank you. It should
iconic,
have some pizzazz.
specifically to the IP.
Yeah, and all it is like it can beak and claw you, and
Agrees
it can
you.
see in the dark. It's just like, come on.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I
Just
think this
a
was, mhm,
just a different flavored bear, basically.
yeah, and I think what I did, and I didn't do it well because that was really early in the first campaign where I was still trying to get my sea legs underneath me. I think I gave it a screech power. I gave it basically rage when it got bloodied, another fourth edition term that isn't used in fifth edition anymore.
Mhm.
I don't think I played it off very well because it was still really early in the campaign and it was me kind of messing with stuff. But yeah, some of the stat blocks are very much lackluster for me. Where it's puts the onus back on me to describing it accurately in combat, which is still it's just going to smack you and hit you. But yeah, diving into previous editions and seeing what they did in previous editions helped me for sure in that regard.
Yeah, as you said, 4th edition Monster Manual was fantastic.
Hmm.
I don't know why they didn't carry that over in 5th edition because that's, like, one of the few things they did right with 4th edition.
Hmm. And
Well,
skill
let me
challenges, but I'll
ask
talk
you a
about that
question.
later.
Um, how do you feel about legendary actions? Because as a player, it's I just find it annoying. I don't know how if you because I haven't DM'd a game where I've used legendary actions. So, for as a DM, how do you feel about that?
The way that fifth edition works, a boss has to have them, especially if they're going up against the party solo. Just because the action economy. Without legendary actions, you've got a party of 4, party of 5. They're going to get one action out of that entire round. It's needed because the the power can swing very easily when you just have more bodies on either side.
Mhm.
And that's why when you're looking at like a CR for an encounter of whether it's like medium, hard, or deadly, the more monsters that you throw at it, the multiplier goes up because there's more chances of them to do things to you. It's essentially, but I, I know how it can feel, but it's a necessary evil for the bosses to feel like bosses, if that makes sense. To feel like they're
Yeah.
a legendary creature, um, for the sort of their namesake. Um, Same way for legendary resistances. You guys didn't have a whole lot of those come across, and I know how that can feel pretty shitty to a player. But I think it's needed to sort of put those few and specific monsters at a higher level than just the rest of the enemies that you face.
Mhm.
Because the last thing that I would want is if you were fighting a boss is for it to just feel like another stack of HP you got to get through. And that's not fun. And I feel like even in games, that happens where if you're fighting an important enemy, it feels the same just with more hit points. Doesn't feel good, right? Feels like a bullet
Right.
sponge at that point.
So
That's
yep,
my thought on it.
always had issues with CR when it comes to building encounters.
Yeah,
Yeah, CR is tricky.
yeah, and the reason why I lean on it is it's not a great system holistically, but it's the system that I have, so I lean on it and then adjust from there. Yeah, it's more of a starting point for me, and pretty much I just use the encounter builder on D&D Beyond as a starting point, and then go from there. Yeah,
Right.
exactly what Trekhead is saying is the action economy there.
Yeah, I felt when we were doing campaign 1, the action and economy got too crazy because we had too many because we got really high level. So now we have too many tools at our disposal, so it gets really hard to remember what we have. And it's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, did I already do reaction? Did I do this? Or I already used my bonus action. Now I can't do this." So it's just like there's a lot of mathing going on.
Hmm.
Kinda like I'm like constantly trying to plan my next move before like it gets to my turn.
Imagine how I feel.
Oh, you're
I
managing like
I
10
y-
monsters.
yeah, I feel the pressure on my end, and it might be, I don't know if it's a detriment to the show or not, is when it gets to my turn, I try and go as fast as I can to make things happen so it doesn't feel like it's slogging on even worse. Um but yeah, I don't know. I will say the other thing that I had on my list of things that frustrated me are this is a very petty and very specific one, but the invisible condition is so
Mhm.
confusing. It is so confusing. Uh
'Cause it just says you get advantage on stealth, right?
no, no. I pulled it up because I knew I was going to talk about it. Um, so invisible for the purpose of hiding, the important part, you are treated as heavily obscured. And then it says your location can be detected by any noise it makes or any tracks it leaves.
Right.
So attack rolls against it have disadvantage. The creature's attack rolls advantage. Okay. So then you jump over. Okay, what's the heavily obscured? Right. Um, a creature effectively suffers the blinding condition when you're trying to see something in that area. Okay, what's the blinding condition? Let's jump back over to the blinding condition. Like it's convoluted. And okay, a blinded creature can't see. It automatically fails an ability check that requires sight. Attack rolls have advantage. So it just seems, I don't know, it seems convoluted to me. And a lot of people, there's a disconnect. It's like, well, I'm invisible. You still have to use your action to hide, though. But why? They can't see me. Like, I don't know. It feels too. I don't know. It doesn't feel fleshed out enough for me. They went through the trouble of making it a condition and then pointed every other direction of how to explain it.
Please refer to book 3, paragraph 5, page 356. Then you
Yeah,
go to that page and it's like, please refer to book 4.
yeah, yeah. And don't get me started on like hiding in general in D&D as well. It's a whole thing um that is confusing in and of itself as well. But I don't know, especially you think of rogues, of how a lot of their some of their things depend on it, but also don't. But people always want to try and hide in situations where it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's convoluted and not fun. Yeah. What else
Oh,
do you wish D&D did better? Let your hate flow. I don't know. I feel like we've been kind of spitting for 45 minutes here.
yeah, I
Um,
think we can transition over. So let's not poop on it too hard, but like
it
you
comes
know,
from a place of love. We want it to be better.
yeah. Through these like frustrations and limitations, we can move forward on like how to improve your experience with house rules. For things you don't like about D&D, you can make house rules to make it more enjoyable and more fun. So,
Hmm.
like for example, yes, the hunter's mark is not a class feature in the spell, and it's also concentration. Where I'm playing on my Lord of the Rings campaign, it's just a class feature, like, and it doesn't require concentration,
Hmm.
and that just dramatically improves the ranger in like 3 times.
Yeah, I've played in a campaign with that specific language as well, and it's great. It feels really good.
It does feel good, and then you're open to do other things because, like at the end of the day, if you're a min maxer, your 100 marks is always up forever.
I will say, because I've done quite a bit of house rules in our campaign. Um, One of which that I love, that I've leaned on so much, that I just lifted directly from fourth edition, are skill challenges. I, I
Yes.
I cannot fathom as to why there's not something like that specifically in fifth edition. 'Cause some of their stuff, like the chase rules, like not great, too crunchy. But in the chase that you all did, I used a skill challenge, and I thought that it went pretty well, pretty easy to understand. Um,
Oh, it's a great solution. I'm glad you carried it over from 4th edition.
yeah, they're fantastic. And if you're not sure what skill challenges are, essentially you have a threshold of successes that the group needs to get, and there could be they have so many chances to succeed, and if they get that many successes, then the good happens. If they fail a certain amount of times, then the bad happens. And it creates sort of tension, an easy way to narrate through it. The way that I like to do it is like it sort of leaves it open ended. Um, is, hey, tell me what skill you want to use and explain why it'll work in this situation, and let's see what happens. Some skill challenges have specific sets of skills that you can use,
Mhm.
but I love them. I don't know if I lean on them too much. I hope that I don't, but I think it's a great way to break up the monotony of different things to do with your dice as well, and different things to use. I think it makes it you feel good for taking skills at that point. It makes you feel good for being proficient in things.
I think it's good for storytelling as well
Hmm.
because, meta-wise players can know, like, if I fail this, we fail the skill challenge and something bad will happen, or
Hmm.
it creates a lot of fun drama in storytelling wise. So I think it's great with the skill challenges should be used all the time. Well,
Yeah.
not all the time, but yeah, like, yeah, I don't think you're heavy-handed with skill challenges, so I
Hmm.
think you've been in campaign 1, I thought it was great.
Yeah, they're a great tool in the toolbox. And I agree with what you're saying, Zeus, is that creating a good skill challenge is much harder than designing a good combat encounter. 100%. 100%. Um, Agree on that one. I don't know. I feel like I use them a lot for like chase scenes, and I think that they work really well for chase scenes, but they could be done for like negotiations, all kinds of fun stuff. And I guess that's technically a house rule or homebrew, but it's just lifted from a previous edition, and the DC's changed to make sense for fifth edition.
Mhm.
What about you? Any house rules that you like or that you run with?
Uh, this one is probably controversial, um, but I like to give barbarians and druids extra use of charge and wild shape, especially at low level, because I feel like having only 2, uses of wild shape is too limiting. Because when I play druid, I mostly use it for like investigation or exploration, or like if we're infiltrating a base, I use it a lot to, you know, for like role playing or just searching for things rather than for combat.
Mhm.
And this was me playing a moon druid, and I mostly used it to for like storytelling. So I felt like only having two really limited my character, even though it's like you rechargeable on a short rest, but like
Mhm.
not players don't short rest a lot. Like it's it's like they don't do it often.
You do if you have a warlock in the group.
Mm. But yeah, that's something I do, and I feel that it makes it more enjoyable and gives player more freedom to use it.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that
Yeah,
because I feel like, especially if you're a moon druid, you would typically want to save those charges for combat. Like you
yeah,
feel like you kind of have to, because then you'll be less than ideal in those situations. That's interesting to think about.
yeah. It's just something that I do that caters to my play style or
Mhm.
my group likes. Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's like what is good for your group, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and then a lot of this. One thing that I like to do when I think of like house ruling or home brewing, is I try to think of like what problem am I trying to solve, right? What am I trying to solve for my game? Because you can add all the house rules that you want, right, and make combat crunchy or make people remember certain things. But I try to keep it to like, what am I doing to make the game better, and then help that inform me what I introduce into the game. That's just something that I do. So, for example, in the game Secret's death saves on their saving throws.
Mhm.
Um, in that regard, the problem that I was trying to solve was to take the metagaminess out of death saves. Because I've been in a situation where, a player is down. Oh, he's got two successes. He's fine. We can keep fighting and then get him up later, right? Which is very metagamey,
Yes.
but doesn't feel like what would actually happen in like this fantasy combat, right? You know, um, I don't think if I watch my companion go down and they look okay. I'll keep fighting for a little bit. Like no, that's no, it doesn't feel heroic. Doesn't feel like you're in like the fantasy like action movie, right? Somebody goes down. It's like the onus of the party changes where we have to get them up. We have to get them back to into the fight. So that's kind of what I tried to do with the secret death saving throws. Is they have no idea how many successes or how many failures they have. So it immediately creates that sense of urgency. Now, yeah, technically they might have a couple
It does.
turns and they don't know where they're at, but they don't know how much time they have and how the battle can change. So I don't know. I really liked that, and I think the players did too. Creates that instant tension.
Yeah, I did enjoy it, and I was losing my mind when everyone went down and campaign 1 and
Uh huh.
changed everything, that I had planned, and it was just it was full on panic mode. But it wa in a good sense, not like I was dreading it, but I was like,
Yeah, and that's what would you would expect Ron to do in a situation where multiple people go down. They're not going to keep fighting because they seem okay. Like he's going to say, oh shit, my friends are down, what do I do? But I also have another another rule is that if you roll a nat one and a death save, it only counts for one failure. I don't like the idea of if you roll a nat one in your death saving throw, it's two failures, because when characters start going down, you can death spiral very quickly.
"Oh, yeah."
Um, case in point, you know, if you roll a nat one in your death save, you get two failures, enemy walks up to you and crits you, you're dead. One round down, so that feels a little too swingy for me.
Another rule that I like, is that everyone gets a bonus feat, at level 1. It
Mhm.
just it really helps build your character out and, feel a little bit more powerful. I 'cause we haven't done that in the past with my group, but we just started doing it, and it feels so much better. It's just like fantastic.
Yeah. I like it too. I think we're doing that for campaign 2 actually, if I remember
We
correctly.
are.
I
We
think I
are.
added it in
Yeah.
the house rules. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Um, yeah, I totally agree. It adds that little flair of just differentiation immediately to your character. That's what I
Yeah.
like that. I agree with that
Yeah.
one.
Zeus likes a house rule that when you are at 0, you can still be conscious, but can't take any actions. That way you can at least still have an emotional final farewell or croak out critical before passing out. Really amps up the drama instead of a binary of 0 to 0.
Yeah.
I think that
That's
was
interesting.
from 3rd edition too. Like, if you were at 0, you you were still conscious, but if you took an action, then you would fall into negatives
Yeah, that's
unless you
interesting.
healed yourself.
Yeah, because I feel like yeah, because you're if you're incapacitated, you're unconscious, and you can't really do that.
Yeah.
Um, I think I've played with that a little bit. Not exactly what you were saying, but pretty early on when an NPC died, they had a nice emotional. I just kind of I feel like I had to let the characters know I was like, you can't save him, but he's got some stuff to say.
Yeah.
Pretty early when that happened. I think that's a good idea.
Oh, yeah. I dig it. I did there was one point when I talked to you, I was like, "Hey, if Ron ever goes down and just, like, dead, could you let Ron have, like, a last moment before before passing out?"
Oh yeah.
And you
Mhm.
were like I forgot what you said at the time, where you're like, "We'll we'll cross that bridge when we get there."
Oh, yeah. That sounds like something I would say.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I didn't think how it would pan out, but um yeah. Actually I don't want to go into this because I don't want to give any spoilers away if anyone hasn't finished it. Um but yeah, I feel like character deaths are something that can be tricky to navigate
Mhm.
and require a certain amount of finesse and some teamwork involved there. Is what I'll say to that. Um, interesting you say that is where you say Zeus. I will sometimes ask players in session 0 if you had a choice, how would you like your character to die? There, early on in campaign 1, we would have a pre-session warm up where Bun would find like an interesting RP question and ask like what's your character's like stuff better than this, but I can't remember all of them. Like, what's your character's favorite food, or what would they be doing if they were doing this? And there was one day that she asked. There were two separate questions on two separate days. One of them one was what happens when you die in your character. What do they think happens when they die? And another one would be what would you do today if you knew you were going to die tomorrow? And I have their answers still written down from that
Oh.
because I was sitting on those for a while. So when she asked that, I was like, huh, great warm up question. Type. Yeah, those were great to kind of get people in the mood of RP, especially when you're playing a brand new character that you really haven't sort of lived in for a while. It really helps kind of get you ready to think in their mindset.
Trying to think of any other house rules that I enjoy.
I got one that I'm implementing in the second campaign based on direct player feedback from first campaign. I'm trying out the house rule to where if you are taking a potion of healing for yourself, it's a
Oh,
bonus
yeah.
action. If you're giving it to someone else, it's an action. And that's sort of direct player feedback. And I kind of get why they feel that way. Of in D&D, it's almost always better just to keep hitting the thing instead of taking a healing potion. It almost always works out better in the way in the way D&D goes. So I'm trying
Yeah.
that a little bit differently to see how that affects combat and if it makes it more useful to them. But we'll see how it goes. Um,
I think yeah, I think it will help, but,
Mhm.
um, especially because yeah, healing potions don't heal a lot, and, like, it's basically something to use to stabilize someone or because like, what's the average? 2d4 plus 2, it's like, what, 6 to 8 hit
Yeah.
points? And it
And
just
that's
doesn't feel good to heal that much.
yeah, especially in higher levels. And it goes back to what you were saying about how a lot of magical items are typically not easily or readily available unless you're making them on your own or going through a broker and stuff like that. So that kind of does create that disparity where at the level you all were, the higher level healing potions are probably better off for you. And if you were what level 12, level 13, a regular healing potion is almost like a waste of your turn unless you have to
Yeah,
use it.
because the enemy's gonna hit you for 20 plus, and you're healing for,
You're healing
a
for like
fraction of that.
yeah. Yeah, I agree with
You're
that.
you're bleeding chips at that point.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, yeah, I feel like I've done other stuff. Any other house rules that you think that you like, or anyone in the chat, if there's some house rules that you like that in your games, so I can write them down and use them for my own. No, I'm kidding. Just interesting to hear what people like with their house rules. I thought of one, a great one that I
Boom.
wanted to introduce and didn't explain it well enough in the first campaign that came directly from Zeus, which I thought was amazing. Is typically when you use like Revivify or other spells, it says you have to use a diamond, and this
Mhm.
is almost purely flavor. Um, but he introduced a house rule that I loved and held on to is that you can use a diamond or a gem that matches the color of their eyes to bring them up, which I think is just super cool flavor wise.
That is really cool flavor-wise. 'Cause then that helps you distribute gems for loot, and they're like, "Oh, what color are all your characters' eyes?" Which is very important for casters and cantrips.
It's very important.
It's very
Yes.
important.
It's very important. I'm kicking myself for not bringing that up in the beginning of the campaign because I did not foresee how important characters' eye colors are going to be for the rest of the campaign. So, but I'm going to fix that. Um, actually, I should add that to our session zero sheet because I think I may have talked about it, but I can bring it back up.
Plus, you have to think of every NPC we come across, you have to
Yeah.
determine what their eye colors are.
Yes. It's very important. Very, very important. Yes, the one thing that characters took notes on religiously throughout the campaign are the eye colors of every NPC they ever met.
Zeus has a house rule, degrade all cleric domain armor proficiencies by 1 category except for the war domain.
Hmm. You just
They're all proficient with medium, yes?
yeah, and then some are given heavy. Interesting.
What's your thought process on that, Zeus? 'Cause a lot of there's, like yeah, like, the cloistered cleric feel where they're just wearing robes and stuff, but not most people, but then there's players who wanna be like the war cleric or the battle cleric.
Tired of all these tanky clerics running around.
It's true.
Ah,
Jack says, "In my games, typically when someone drops to 0 hit points, they take a level of exhaustion. This way, even if they get back on their feet, thanks to healing word or something, they still have a lingering problem that makes combat riskier for you. Helps to tramp down on PCs rushing into combat with thinking about risk and tactics."
I like that, and I
That's not
think
yeah, that's not bad.
I like that, and I think that what would make that better is utilizing the one D&D exhaustion rules. Um, because I feel like fifth edition exhaustion rules, it can spiral out of control very quickly if they start stacking up very quickly. But no, that's a really great idea. I like that. But yeah, I get what you're saying. It feels like more cleric domains have access to heavy armor than don't. And I'm wondering why that is. Yeah, what the thought process was behind that. Yeah, all good stuff for house rules. I'll make sure I didn't miss any. Not that I can see anyway.
Yeah, I would see why like nature or life clerics should not have heavy armor proficiency.
Yeah,
Wait, does life get heavy armor? I don't think so, right?
life. I'm pretty sure they do.
Oh, dang.
I'm almost certain. I'm gonna double
I
check because my brain won't be able to handle it if I don't look.
Who says yes? I'll
Yeah,
just defer to chat. But I guess it's in the name because you're a life cleric. You want to be tanky and survivally and healy. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like they shouldn't get heavy personally.
yeah. And what Trek, what you're saying, also helps build up some of the exploration pillar. I think too is when you're doing overland explorations and the characters run into a creature, sometimes they find like tracks or prey remnants and stuff like that. That way they can get an idea of what kinds of creatures are in the area without necessarily running into something that will wipe them out. And they can make an informed decision to back off and go a different direction. Yeah, I think that's cool. That's really cool. It makes the world feel lived in, which I think is
Hmm.
important. And it also kind of gives that subtle hint of hey, there'd be trolls this direction. Maybe you don't want to go that way.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Because there was many years ago when my friends and I did a campaign where we got to a dungeon we weren't supposed to be it at because we were under leveled. But for some reason, we did all the checks and bypassed all the things and just eliminated all the traps somehow. And we ended up being like a mega boss fight, and the campaign ended that night.
Wow.
And the DM, he did everything in his power to say like, "Hey, basically like you shouldn't be here." But we're like, "No, we got this." Like we were just it was our fault 100%, but we're like we disregarded like all the warnings, all the signs, and yeah, and that's what happened.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's hard as a DM, because what seem like heavy-handed hints to me might not seem that way to the players because I have inherent knowledge about what's happening that they don't, right? And I always find it hard to sort of walk that line of, giving them hints in the game versus like, hey, this shit will mess you up. You don't want to be here. That's a very hard line to walk, but I think that um even even if you cross that line and they still want to go, then the
That's
players take it in their
what
hands and see what
they
happens.
decided.
Yeah.
Um, which I don't want to talk about campaign 1 too much, because we're gonna have out of combat live,
Hmm.
but apparently there were a ton of hints and clues that just flew over our heads, and I would love for us to, like, revisit the VODs and then just have, like, cast commentary on, like, "Hey, this is where I told you to do this thing, and, you know, 25 episodes later, you guys finally did it." I would
Yeah.
love to revisit and see all the things that we missed because it just, like, either flew over our heads or, we weren't paying attention or the hints weren't strong enough, I don't know.
Hmm. And that stuff doesn't bother me as a DM either. I unless it's like super important, like I feel like I'll let you all know it's super important. But if I give you a breadcrumb and you don't follow it,
Yeah.
it doesn't bother me. It doesn't go anywhere. It's there if you want it, and if you don't, then that's fine. Because ultimately, the players are going to follow the breadcrumbs that they want to play. They'll create the game they want to play. I'll just create the world that they live in, essentially.
Mhm. Zeus has another house rule. Before embarking on an adventure, the DM gives you X short rests and Y long rests. Players can choose to expend those after appropriate time sleep happens or not to restore resources. This helps address short rest heroes versus long rest heroes in the campaign and keep the action moving instead of everyone dumping all their resources in every fight and then taking a lunch break after.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that as a solution um to combat that. I know that in my DM style, I like to make it apparent that in certain situations they can't long rest there, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it comes in the situation where like, oh, we'll just leave. Then I was like, well, things are going to change if you leave and come back. That gives the denizens information that you're here and that they might be waiting for you next time. But I see that as a definite way to sort of combat that. We take a long rest every time we do something. Um, it's definitely valid. I just don't like remembering extra numbers.
No,
We can
you're
hardly keep up
juggling.
with who's used their reaction, much less how many rests they've taken.
Ooh,
um, I'll
action economy
say,
is a whole nother conversation.
yeah, 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 yeah. One thing that I do, that I think is pretty popular among a lot of D&D players is when someone wants to help with a skill check. What I do is if you want to help, then you have to be proficient in that skill
Mhm,
to be able to help for that skill check. And the reason why I do that is I've been in situations where it always comes up to where like, oh, I help, I help, I help, I help, I help, like on every single skill check.
mhm,
I don't
yeah,
know. I feel like that it. I don't know if it necessarily curbs that, but I feel like it gives players a specific sort of purpose if they've taken that skill, right? It makes sense to me is that if, um, for example, if you are trained in, I don't know, perception, right? Someone's trying to find something, you can point out the things that you notice because you're trained in it. Um,
right.
versus five people who aren't trained in perception just looking and hoping that somebody finds it. I don't know. That's something that I do. I'm looking through our next campaign session 0 to see what house rules I implemented.
I think that's it.
Most of them, yeah.
Yeah. Zeus, you're confusing me because you're saying Witch Bolt discuss, and there's a game coming out called Witch Bolt, I think. So I'm like not sure which one you're referring to.
He's referring to the spell
Yeah.
and the issues that that are in that spell. Um,
Let's take a look. Witch Bolt, level 1 evocation spell, range 30 feet, concentration 1 minute. A beam of crackling blue energy lances out towards a creature within range, forming a sustained arc of lightning between you and the target. Make a range attack spell against the creature. On hit, the creature takes 1d12 lightning damage. And on each of your turns for the duration, you can use your action to deal 1d12 lightning damage to the target automatically. The spell ends if you use your action to do anything else. The spell also ends if the target is ever outside of your range spell, if that is total cover from you.
so it's
That is
concentration.
a lot.
So it's concentration. If they step out of your range, you lose it, and if they step around the corner, you lose it. It's essentially the problems with it. Is if I cast Witch Bolt on you using my concentration, blowing a first level spell slot, and your character steps behind a corner, it's gone.
I feel like that should be cantrip. I
I
don't know.
think the recurring damage will put it a little bit above cantrip status. Yeah, it does scale awfully. Yeah, in that when you cast a spell using a second level or higher, you increase the damage by d12. Yeah, I can see that. Problematic.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never used it, so
There's probably a reason why you haven't ever
yeah.
used it. Yeah, it's the initial damage, not the sustained damage. The sustained damage is always just the d12, right? So yeah, it doesn't scale very well at all.
And you can't do anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if you spend your action to do anything else, it ends. And if you lose concentration, of course, it'll end. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very lackluster spell, especially in that the sustained damage doesn't increase either. So you get that
So
initial, you cast it at third level, you get that initial 3d12, and then you spend your action doing a d12 after that. Where if you are, let's say, warlock that has access to Witch Bolt, you just cast Eldritch Blast instead. You're
yeah.
much better off. You don't have to waste your concentration, any of that stuff.
As a DM, And we're on the topic of house rules and how to improve your experience with Dungeons& and Dragons, how would you improve that spell?
I would ask Zeus what he did last time that I played with it and use that. I don't remember what he did to fix that. Um that's where I um lack in that sort of homebrew ability. For me, I this is where I try to stay out of the game designer territory because I could try my hand at fixing it, but I don't know what what my tinkering with it will affect other things.
Mm,
Like my first thought, and I don't know if this is what your fix did, Zeus, or not. I'm just top of my head here is you've got to do something about that the sustained damage, the action that you use after the initial one. It has to scale in some way when you increase the level that you cast it at. Otherwise, it's not going to be used. I think that's the biggest problem there. Um, I kind of feel like, especially like let's say that I casted this spell at like a third level, and if someone broke line of sight, just which could be very easy to do,
yeah.
that doesn't feel very good either.
I feel for me, um, that to make it better, the more turns you sustain damage, the damage scales. But that just
That's
that's a lot
interesting.
of math,
It is very
uh,
crunchy, not
and a
very
lot of very
finey.
crunchy, but that for me, that would be a solution. But let's see
Yeah.
what Zeus says here. Alright, if
Yeah, see,
it
yeah, so maybe I just channeled what you'd already done and it was in my brain is so yeah, if the range or action usage breaks the spell, it doesn't end the spell, it just breaks this sort of arc between them, and you still have it as long as you maintain concentration and can attempt to reestablish it again.
mm,
Um, so you just make another ranged spell attack on that, and then the initial damage is only a D12, but the sustained damage scales up by plus 1 D12 per spell slot. Mhm.
feel
Yeah,
like
that's
we
interesting.
feel like we could talk about the same thing for Call Lightning, how it's
Mhm.
just a useless spell where it used to be god tier, then 3/5. Uh, yeah, just because you have to spend your action to call down a lightning bolt.
Yeah. I like the thought that you had of the longer it's sustained, the more powerful it is. I think
Mhm,
that's a mechanic that I haven't really seen in fifth edition that I can think of off the top of my head. That'd be interesting to explore, because that pretty much forces like the enemy's hand at that point of it pretty much puts a giant target on your back for the caster.
yeah.
But maybe that's what you want. I don't know.
Yeah, like the whoever's being targeted by spell has to decide if they wanna take the damage and go for it or find a way to lose line of sight or break concentration.
Yeah. Hmm.
But in my mind, the way I don't know, it's because I'm in game dev for so long or because I was thinking about Godzilla, Shin Godzilla, like, as his beam gets longer, it gets, like, super focused and changes. And then, like, the final beam is just, like, this high pitched, tiny little laser, which does, like,
Hmm.
immense, crazy amount of damage.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh. Yeah, I think for because me and my friends, we've been working on our own campaign setting for, like, 15 years,
Hmm.
world building, creating new races, like, revamping classes, having our own pantheon, and just, like at one point, we were creating our own feats, but this is when we were in 3.5, and then with and we played 3.5 for a very long time, because we didn't wanna convert everything to 5th until we were like, "You know what? Let's just play 5th and see what happens." And
Hmm.
then slowly trying to convert everything, which was is a monumental task, so I don't and then now, who knows what 1 D&D is gonna change all that again.
Yeah.
So we're used to, like, homebrewing things and, like, saying, "This doesn't feel right. What can we do to fix it?" And then
Hmm.
testing that out, like, when we play, like, "Alright, this session, we're gonna test this out and see how it feels." If it's Do we need to if it's OP, then we gotta tone it down, or if it doesn't work, it just doesn't work and stuff like that. So I don't see why we can't do that for campaign 2 if like issues come up and we could just like, house rule or homebrew uh, for one session and see how it feels. But I don't know how that affects you and your storytelling element and how we're like
Yeah.
trying to be entertaining and providing a show and a service at the same time.
Yeah, and I feel like this might be a detriment on my part, but I don't want to introduce new things in the middle, and if they don't work out, take them away.
Hmm.
Because in my mind, because it's different. If we're just sitting around playing at a table, we could do that. But if for some reason in
Yeah,
my mind it's different because we're producing a show.
yeah, I
Um,
agree.
so I feel much more hesitant to sort of introduce things and then take them away if they don't work. Doesn't mean I won't. Um, but I feel like it would be something that would be much more vetted, like some of the house rules that we implemented this time that I saw a need for.
Let's see, cantrips versus wizards with weapons. Wizards with weapons?
Wizard has no use for a weapon in fifth edition whatsoever because of how cantrips are. I'm
Yeah.
curious what proficiencies a wizard has.
Well, you're basically an eldritch knight, right? If you wanted to do that.
Daggers, darts, slings, quarterstaffs, light crossbows. They have no reason to use any of those because they have cantrips that scale with their character level.
Yep.
To be honest, um, yeah, I guess the only reason you'd have to use those is if you were captured and your spell focus and your components were taken away. But the only reason,
Flavor. I don't know.
yeah. But I feel like in that sense, it'd be flavor at the very much detriment of your character at that point,
Yeah. Um,
at least in the higher levels.
yeah, if hey, if that's something you want to do, then more power to you. I'm not gonna let you stop
I'm
living
not
your
gonna
best
stop you.
dreams.
Yeah, I'm not gonna stop you, but I mean, because I mean, just look at Firebolt, right? Sure, it's 1d10 when you are just a little wizard, right? Um, you look at these weapons: daggers, darts, slings. Okay, those are all dex. Light crossbow, that's dex. Um, quarterstaff, strength, right?
I think horse has versatile.
Means they can use it one or two handed. It's
Yeah.
not finesse.
Oh,
So
okay, you're
so
right. Yeah.
strength.
Hmm.
What are they going to do with that? What wizard's going to put points into strength to use a quarterstaff that can get you at most a D10? When in four more levels, your firebolt's going to be better and it ranged.
Yeah.
Um, and same thing for the other weapons. I mean, dex. Yeah, your wizard might want some dex, but I mean, what's a mage armor for, right? Um, Still not enough dex to where you want to use the weapons over using literally any cantrip in the game. So yeah, I don't know. It seems funny. They have the proficiencies, but why would they use them? Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. At that point, it's just flavor.
Yeah, like rogues getting long swords. That's a weapon proficiency. I mean, sure, you can use it, but why would you ever? Because you would immediately not be able to use. Arguably, I would even say not unarguably your class's main feature of sneak attack, right?
Right. You only get it with light weapons. Is that how it's worded?
Finesse,
Finesse
if I'm
weapons.
if I'm not mistaken, because you can get it with a rapier. I'm gonna look it up though because I can't help myself.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of
finesse arranged.
these could be solved by, yeah, like house homebrew rules
Yeah.
to make the player feel confident or happy or at least comparable with like the other groups of wanting to play this kind of style. Um,
Yeah. How
it's just a lot of work.
how
Not a lot of work, but I would say just ask the DM and then see what
yeah.
happens. You know.
How how would I weave weapon proficiencies with a wizard if they wanted to use it without breaking the game? I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Off the top of my head, it's their spell focus. So because it's a melee weapon and their spell focus, they can use their spell casting modifier for to do those things.
Hmm.
Just that's just off the top of my head.
Yeah. You have
But
to make
then
up for the damage too, but yeah.
you're you're in melee as a caster. So
Which is not
yeah.
generally not a good idea for most casters. Not all. Clerics are great at it with all their heavy armor.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I think this was good.
Yeah.
Can't really think of anything else off the top of my head, but uh fantastic. Good second edition of Tome of Knowledge.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for watching.
Oh,
If you didn't
tomb. Damn it.
know,
What am I doing?
what's
Never
that?
mind. I had it right the first time. I was mixed tome and tomb all the time.
It's home,
I had it right
tomb,
the first time and I
cave,
ruined it.
the
Dang it.
cave of knowledge. No.
Yeah.
No, yeah, thanks for watching the second iteration of the Casters and Cantrips Tome of Knowledge. I almost messed up there because I was thinking about it. So thanks for your participation. I hope that you like these. If you didn't know, we're on YouTube as well, and you could watch us literally right now, but not for much longer. But the VOD will be up there forever. And I will eventually get this and the first one on our podcast platforms. It just so happened that I went on vacation the day after we did this last one, so I haven't had time to do it. But yeah, stay tuned. This Friday, we've got the Mauve Mini Worlds coming up. You don't want to miss that. We'll have an official announcement out tomorrow. A little behind on the art and things, but that's okay because it's happening.
Life
So
happens.
yeah, life
Um,
happens, but it's happening.
and if there are subjects or topics you would like Max and I to discuss for the next edition of Tome of Knowledge, let us know in the Discord, on the socials, all the things, everything that you can find at castersandcantrips.com.
Yeah,
And
put it in
in
the chat.
in the comments
Put it in the
everywhere.
comments.
And like and subscribe and that really helps us with the algos and gets our stuff out there.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time, and we will definitely see you on Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific. Be there. Bye, everybody.